stage, the Cabinet Office Minister in charge of no deal planning, Michael Gove, doubled down on that threat.
While the difficulties caused by leaving without a deal will pass, the damage to our democracy in not getting Brexit done would endure and resound for much longer. Our democracy is precious, and it depends on people trusting us as politicians when we say that we will put our trust in them.
Big announcement yesterday, new money for 40 hospitals, but if you look more closely at the detail, it turns out the government is only promising 6 new hospitals over the next 5 years, investment totalling £2.7 billion. Health Secretary Matt Hancock says the government can afford the spending because the economy is in a better state.
We've announced that we're going to be rebuilding 40 hospitals right across the country, and of course recruiting the people who are going to work in them. We care deeply about making sure that the NHS is there for you and for your family and is sustainable into the long term, and so we're putting £13 billion extra additional money into this plan. We can find the money. It's not coming through PFI or any of those sorts of schemes that have been used in the past. We can find the money because the economy is strong, and this means that we can rebuild our NHS.
Yesterday, Boris Johnson was speaking to the BBC. He was, of course, asked about his links to the American model and businesswoman Jennifer Curie, with whom it was alleged at the weekend he had had an affair.
Everything was done in accordance with the code that you have just
So you did declare
recited,
the interest?
And everything was done with full propriety.
So you did declare the interest, and you'll be able to say that when you're called
No,
to
I
various
said that
hearings.
everything was done in accordance with
I ask you a very
full
specific
propriety.
question. You have to declare an interest. Did you declare it?
There was no interest to declare.
Boris Johnson ending Theo Usherwood's report. More from Theo Usherwood, and indeed in more detail of what Boris Johnson said at that interview. Anyway, let's come back though to the question I'm asking you, which is, do you believe that in some way democracy could be damaged if Britain does not Brexit come October the 31st? In the studio here in Manchester with me, Josh Hardy, who's Deputy Director General of the CBI. Thank you for coming along so early in the morning. Mr. Hardy, thank you. Is Mr. Gove right?
I think if the message at party conference is get Brexit done, the message from business is get a deal done and get that deal through Parliament, because that unlocks transition, that unlocks investment, all of the things we should be talking about, education, skills, infrastructure, net zero. Then we can really focus on that. A deal will help that. No deal won't.
How can they get a deal done when it seems the maths in the House of Commons is against Mr. Johnson?
Well, I think it's absolutely, firstly, agree a deal with the EU, and I think it feels like the landing zone for that is pretty small now, but it is still there, and the EU need a deal as well. So let's get that arrangement. And then, yes, it falls to the whole of Parliament. You know, business, like everybody else, is watching with a sense of sort of bemusement and frustration at what's going on. If their deal is brought back, can Parliament come together and actually support it?
Yeah, but that we could have said that months ago, and they didn't come together then. What is it? Do you think because it's just so close? Is that what it is? Effectively, fear of the unknown.
I mean, to be honest, we hope really that the evidence that business is providing. So CBI put as much evidence about what is really going on the ground in the economy with businesses at the moment. But it's not just the CBI. You have surveys this morning from Lloyds, from Santander, from the Federation of Small Businesses last week. The evidence about the impact on our economy is unavoidable. A deal is what gets us out of that.
CBI is the same organisation suggesting we join the euro, of course. How much credence should we give what you tell us?
Talk to businesses.
Well, no, let's come back to the fact that your organisation said it would be a good idea to join the euro. That was a calamitous mistake by your organisation, wasn't it?
At the time, what we said, there were 3 tests that could be
you could have joined the euro. Your organisation could have had the country in the euro.
No, those tests were never met. Our position was the same as the government. If these tests are met, then it seems like a good idea. But either way, listen to businesses. We've spoken to thousands of businesses. Listen to other business organisations. I mentioned the Federation of Small Businesses, the Institute of Directors, the Chambers of Commerce, hundreds of trade associations, all saying the same things. Because when you talk to businesses on the ground, they tell you about the billions of pounds they're having to spend on preparation and how that doesn't even protect them in the case of no deal.
Lastly, if there were to be another delay, Mr. Hardy, if we were to go to the end, I can see you rolling your eyes, if we were to go to the end of January, there's even talk that we go beyond January the 31st, which I find extraordinary. What would the impact on business be as you see it?
If the delay helps us to get a deal, then that is clearly better than no deal, because no deal is the real fear. But of course, delays delay uncertainty, and so a deal as quickly as possible is what every bit of effort should go into.
But you work with them far more than I see them. I just wonder how much longer our businessmen and women can take a delay. It must be driving them nuts.
It's deeply frustrating, but they are committed to this country, and if a deal is in sight, then that gives them hope. But yes, it is sometimes difficult to hold on to that hope.
Mr. Hardy, thank you for coming by the studio. Josh Hardy, you're Deputy Director General of the CBI. Listening to that is Shankar Singham, who's CEO of Compitair, and Director of the International Trade and Competition Unit of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Let's talk democracy with you. Do you think it's in danger, in some way will be damaged if Britain doesn't Brexit? Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, you know, Michael Gove talked in the clip you just had to the issue of democracy. I'm particularly concerned about the economic effects here, and I think Josh would probably agree with me that continued uncertainty is the big problem here. And the problem with an extension is that all you're doing is pushing off the moment of truth when you have to either get a deal or get ready to leave without a deal to another day, and it's more uncertainty. And the economic evidence is now fairly clear that it's the uncertainty that we're living with now that is causing the problem. There's a lot of capital on the sidelines that's ready to invest in the UK, but the longer that this period of uncertainty continues, the less likely that becomes. So, you know, I would agree with Michael Gove that there will be disruptions as a result of no deal, but at least there will be certainty, and there's a limited number of preparations, no deal preparations that businesses can make. They cannot be in a state of continual readiness for no deal. It's much better actually to have an outcome, you know, even if it's a bad outcome, that they can then prepare for and plan around. But the crucial thing is, it's obviously far better to leave with a deal. It is far better to get a deal before the end of October. Unfortunately, the actions of Parliament in essentially forcing the Prime Minister to request an extension have made that harder, not easier, because what's happened is the threat of no deal, the compression at the back end of the negotiation, which is so necessary to actually getting the EU, and particularly to getting the government of Ireland to open up and have a proper discussion about what alternative arrangements would be necessary in order to get a deal. All of that compression has been taken off now, so it makes it much harder to get the deal that I think everyone would like to see before.
But let me ask you this: how much do you think the United Kingdom is actually in charge of its own destiny at this time?
Well, it depends what you mean by the United Kingdom, doesn't it, really?
Well,
I mean,
Boris Johnson and the government.
Well, exactly. The government is much less in charge of its destiny at the moment than it was prior to the act that forced him to request an extension. Because the problem is, it's what the EU believes, it's what the Irish government believe. If they don't believe that an extension can be avoided, in other words, they don't believe that no deal will occur on October the 31st, then the incentive for them to open up and have a conversation that gets us to a deal is much less. It doesn't go away altogether, but it is much less. It makes this job much more difficult.
And lastly, if you look at what is happening at the conference, what do you think needs to come out from the Conservative conference, from Boris Johnson over the next couple of days as regards a Brexit deal?
Yeah, well, I mean, we, as I think you know, we have been working pretty hard on the Alternative Arrangements Commission for alternative arrangements to the Irish border, and we've launched what we think would work. You know, in other words, the sort of deal that would be acceptable to the EU, first of all, in terms of alternative arrangements at the Irish border. We've suggested language for a withdrawal agreement. We've suggested language for a political declaration. We believe that package, that Brexit package, is enough to get a majority of the House of Commons based on the Brady Amendment, plus more people, I think, who recognise that not delivering Brexit when, you know, large numbers of their constituency voted to leave is going to give them a problem at the subsequent general election. So I think there are numbers to get that deal through, and we're anxious to pursue it.
I'm grateful for your time. Shankar Singham, thank you. You're Director of the International Trade and Competition Unit of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and you're CEO of Compitair. All right, coming up after the news, your reactions to the idea. Is democracy effectively under threat, as Michael Gove asserted here in Manchester yesterday? In other news, we'll look at the suggestion that the runaway jihadi bride, as she's known, Shamima Begum, will never return to this country. Details on that. And in a related story, that exclusive LBC investigation, you'll hear part one, where we blow apart, reportedly, one of the biggest people trafficking rings across the Channel.
How much is the cost? How many people?